Hello and welcome to today's podcast episode, to you who are listening and to our guest today, Devamitra.
Hello, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Great. You're in London, are you?
I'm in London. I'm at the London Buddhist Centre, where it's a bit gloomy today, but not too bad. At least it's not cold, as it has been.
Well, it's really lovely to have you here. We published your book, which is called Entertaining Cancer, the Buddhist Way, in February this year, February 2022. So it's a couple of months since the book came out. And I thought it'd be a really good time to catch up with you to find out a bit about how that's been going and I suppose look at the book in a bit of a broader context. So for those people who haven't yet encountered the book or had a chance to read it, it's not your biography, but it is a memoir of a very particular time in your life. I wonder if you could just say, sort of in a way, what happened, what you were writing about.
Well, I started writing because I'd been diagnosed with cancer, and It partly what happened actually was, it sounds a bit bizarre, but the first few meetings I had with doctors were rather amusing in a strange sort of way, and I can't resist humour, and so I decided to write about that. I tried to sort of write about my experience of being diagnosed very much with my natural sense of humour, which does sometimes get out of hand. You'd be amazed at what's been cut out of this document. But some of the humour works. I mean, I was speaking to someone just the other day who's just started reading, and he's a theatre director, and he said, "Look, I've been laughing out loud, Devamitra." I said, "Well, that's great. That's what you're supposed to do." So it was partly just I can't resist anything which gives me an opportunity to exploit my humour. And so that's what I did. But of course, there was more to it than that. I was very, well, I suppose I've always remembered the opening lines to the Bodhicharyavatara, where Shantideva says, "There's nothing original here. I'm just doing this basically for the purposes of clarifying my own mind." And that was part of what I wanted to do as well. So it was quite complex. I wanted to objectify my experience. I wanted to better understand it. And I think always, probably always at the back of my mind somewhere was the possibility that what I wrote might be of help and benefit to others. So all those things were at play. As you can imagine, being diagnosed with a serious cancer is, it's not something which happens every day, fortunately. Unfortunately, it's happening more and more to other people. I've met so many people in the last few weeks who've got cancer or who've had it, some whose cancers have metastasized, as mine has now, and so on and so forth. So there's it's got a whole new world that I've entered, really, the world of cancer, its treatments, its patients, its doctors, and I found the whole process absolutely fascinating.
So you got this diagnosis. It was prostate cancer, right?
Yeah. It was fairly advanced prostate cancer, stage 3B. Stage 4 is terminal. It wasn't terminal at the time I was originally diagnosed, though it was on the edge. And it was treated urgently because I had 2 infected lymph nodes. And it was important that they were targeted quite hard because with that, if they weren't, then there was a very strong chance that it would metastasize and that would be the end of things. So the radiotherapy that I received as part of my diagnosis hit the lymph nodes particularly hard, I was told, and that caused me all sorts of problems with the strength in my legs, because the prostate, of course, is located right at just the top of your thighs, really, just above the top of your thighs. So that the lymph nodes serve the purpose, I was told, of sending fluid down into the legs, which it gives them their energy partly. So I was really severely incapacitated by that.
So the story starts in late 2016 with this diagnosis, and then carries on for pretty much 3 years within the story of the book, isn't it? In the narrative of the book, of the diagnosis, of the clarification of the treatment, as you say, of both radiotherapy and chemotherapy, and then,
and hormone therapy.
Yes. So you got it all. You got everything sort of thrown at that body of yours.
Yes.
And then the story in the book finishes up sort of around early 2020, isn't it? Where you're sort of in a way recovering from the treatments as much as recovering from the cancer.
Yes.
It's a very engaging book to read. It's a great title, Entertaining Cancer. We'll come back to the humour dimensions a few times, I imagine. But one of the things that really struck me when I first read it in manuscript form, and also it's one of the things I can see picked up in the conversations you've been having, is that you're a strong personality, Devamitra, in the sense that not only your sense of humour, but there's some very, very striking moments in the book. For example, you have had throughout this sort of story and in our engagements, this thing that actually maintaining a positive mental state is sort of the primary thing.
Yes.
To do, and you've been incredibly strong in doing that. And you had so I'd kind of like to explore that a little bit with you. And there's a story you tell in the book where, when you were a young man, you were an actor in your 20s, and you were in a training program of some sort, and the director, sort of almost as a way of pushing the students, said, what would you not be willing to do on stage? And you said nothing.
That's right. And I meant it too.
I believe you. So I suppose what I'd like to know is sort of what shaped you even before you came into contact with Buddhism. In this book, a lot of what you draw on with your resources for engaging with your cancer diagnosis is your Buddhism, is your Buddhist practice. But it sounds like something else shaped you even before that.
Well, I suppose for anyone who's a practicing Buddhist, the whole issue arises, well, what did you bring with you from a previous life? And I've often wondered about that. And one of the things that struck me looking back over my early life was that I knew from a very early age I was meant for the stage. It was almost as if it was in my bloodstream. That's where I wanted to be. The first time I was taken to see a show, it was a variety show by my grandmother, Nothing Grand, and I was 4 years old, and I just loved it. And we kept going back every week to the Middlesbrough Empire to see the local comedians and singers and dancers and all the rest of it. But I just felt I wanted to be up there with them. And so that sort of drove my life, really. I mean, by the time I was 11 or 12, I think I took part in my first play where I was given the main role, and I was told that, because I was an academic failure all round, but at this school they said, well, we think he's very talented. He should perhaps think of becoming a professional actor, which was no surprise to my parents, although it did horrify them. And then another teacher of mine later on said, he thought, look, have you ever thought about becoming a professional actor? Of course, I was always thinking about it. It's what I wanted to be. And so that was the main driving force in my young life. But it was not easy for all sorts of reasons. Firstly, I come from a very traditional working class, northeastern working class background. My parents had very humble origins. I grew up in the back streets of Middlesbrough, which was pretty tough at the time. And the first 10 years of my life were in Teesside, which is not a pleasant environment. One of the most heavily polluted environments at that time anywhere. I mean, I lived on a housing estate which later was condemned as unfit for human habitation. So, I was breathing in this terrible air. So it was a very sort of it was not the most pleasing environment. But I was very fortunate in that both my parents were very loving. I didn't have any brothers or sisters. I meant everything to them, and they looked after me very kindly. They were very generous to me. But I was always a bit of a sissy, insofar as I was very easily provoked to tears. And this was very, very embarrassing for a young boy. And it meant that I was prone to being knocked around by the other kids. And, because they knew, well, it was very easy to make me cry, which was so embarrassing. I think that that's partly, it connects with the theatre, though, because someone who's known me for a very long time said to me one day fairly recently, he said, "Look, Devamitra, you are the most emotional man I've ever met." And that's probably true. Well, I mean, I don't know. He knows he's quite an emotional person himself. Actually, there might have been an element of projection there, but I know that I'm very emotional, and I think that to succeed as an actor, you need that. A lot of actors are really boring to watch because they're so emotionally dead. And I've talked with directors about this, and they say, well, what you really need from an actor is someone who's emotionally alive. And I always was. That meant I always took things to extremes. I pushed myself, and I allowed directors to push me. But what caused me to have the attitude that you're asking me about, I've no idea, really. I think it seemed to be in me. And I think it carried over into my Buddhist practice because I could see there was a positive place for that within the practice of the Dharma, which is, you just tackle difficult things. And many of the things that I've done in my life I've not wanted to do, and some of them have frankly been rather foolish. But at least I've been open to sort of exploring life fully. I think I've lived life pretty fully. I think it's partly because I have this kind of attitude. When the director concerned who asked me that question was a man called Michael Jelliot, actually, he was quite a famous director in his day. And he shortly afterwards became the artistic director of the Welsh National Opera. I got on with him very, very well. But I could see that he really wanted to push all of us pretty hard, which is why he was asking that question. And he got us to do all sorts of exercises in preparation for the production we did with him that pushed us really hard, psychologically and emotionally. And I really enjoyed that process. I didn't always find it easy. In fact, at times I found it excruciatingly painful. But I wanted to do it because I wanted to succeed in my chosen line of work. I knew that line of work was very tough. You're told when you go to a drama school that 90% of students never work. They never even get their first job. And that's a fact. It remains the case today. Possibly it's even worse than that. And that another 90% of those who do work leave the profession within 5 years. Now, there are all sorts of reasons for that. But I knew I was entering a tough profession. And I was beginning to succeed very well in that profession, but it was making me unhappy. I didn't quite know why. And I knew that I had to leave it all behind me. And I didn't know where I was heading. But I think that, of course, I knew I was looking for something. And eventually I found the Dharma and the Friends of the Western Buddhist Order. And so all that energy went into my practice of the Dharma. So that's what's conditioned me. I perhaps brought it with me from a previous life. I mean, who knows? Of course, local factors in this life would have affected that as well. Living in a pretty tough environment for the first 10 years of my life, and even a bit later, probably helped. You have to toughen up. And I always try to toughen up. I also remember, Bhante on one occasion saying to us, look, if you want to practice the Dharma, you've got to be tough. And looking at the way that some of his teachers lived their lives, I can see that in them. And I could see it in him too, we think about his early life. So it all made sense to me. And I took very much to heart the fact that he said he thought far too many of us let ourselves off the hook. Not only that, worse still, we let our friends off the hook far too easily. So that's part of my background. Whether that amounts to my strength of character or what you mean by strength of character, I don't know, but it's certainly very much part of me. I'm a big personality, partly because I'm an actor, and actors do things writ large. It's just ingrained in you, really. So those elements as well.
I'm curious, it's such an interesting combination that you're speaking about of this kind of toughness and the emotional sensitivity. It's an unusual combination, I suppose, to be able to retain both through your adult life. I'm wondering what it was in the Dharma or in your interactions with the Buddhist Sangha at the time that drew you so strongly. Because, as you say, you stopped being an actor and you sort of gave up on that dream, or you decided to turn away from that dream towards what has been a life in which you've had a lot of roles and responsibilities and done a lot of teaching and really had a really full life as a Buddhist teacher.
Yeah, and it's also been pretty tough as well, I have to say. But at times, not all, but at times, I think that the emotional sensitivity you're talking about is something which slowly emerged. I think I was pretty insensitive when I was young. I've been telling this story quite a lot recently, but I recently stumbled across a video of a talk I'd given at Dhammamegha way back in the 80s. I'd have been in my probably mid-30s, and I very foolishly watched it. At least I watched the first 10, well, it might have been, I think it was less than 10 minutes, about 2 minutes. And I just couldn't stand it. I thought, no wonder people reacted. So I stopped it. But I think that, the thing about me, as my friends keep telling me, my emotions are very much on the surface, whether they're insensitive ones or whether I'm responding sensitively to people. I do seem to have both capacities, although I hope that the insensitivity has dwindled during the course of my life. I hope that the energy behind that has been transformed a bit. I think it probably has. There's still a few rough edges here and there. I'm not the complete polished product by any means. Far from it. But I think there's been a significant change in the course of my life.
It's lovely to hear a bit more of that wider picture. And in a way, you've been talking about how you are in the world in relationship with other people. I can imagine that facing a serious diagnosis of cancer, some of those same threads would be there for you internally. Like, how do you deal with your own sensitivity? How do you deal with your own pain? How do you deal with your own energy? And in a way, how do you engage with the impact of something like that? Humor is obviously one.
Yeah, well, I suppose I never really thought that much about it. I mean, apart from the fact that I knew I had to be very careful and make sure that I maintained skillful mental states, and I tried to do that throughout. And it wasn't that difficult, but I think it was not that difficult partly because I've been practicing the Dharma for 40-odd years and had learned a thing or two in that time. But it's also partly the nature of the experience itself. It's oddly, many people say, it's serious illness of whatsoever kind has had a very, very positive impact upon them because it shifts your perspective. And I think it shifted my perspective. It pushed it along a bit further and opened me up to even more possibilities and ways of seeing things and interacting with people. But I don't know that I consciously did anything other than try to maintain skillful mental states. I was blessed, of course, with supportive conditions. I was living at Sakavati, one of the men's communities above the London Buddhist Centre. I had very many good friends around me. Many people came to visit me. So all that helped. So it was not just internal support, it was also external supports. But yes, I mean, the core elements, I suppose, of my character were well in place by the time this happened. And it had been sort of honed a bit by my practice of the Dharma.
When I first read your manuscript, it reminded me very much of the Noble Eightfold Path. The middle bit that says right effort is about, I suppose, preventing or eradicating negative mental states from arising and really generating and supporting positive mental states, the kind of what you're talking about as skillful mental states. And it sounds to me, what you were saying is that it wasn't actually that difficult, which is pretty amazing.
Well, it wasn't. Well, I was very surprised myself in a way. But I think when you're in such a, let's say, an existential tight spot, it can go either way. It can stimulate the best in you or the worst in you. And I hope that it stimulated the best in me. I feel that it did. Certainly my friends who were with me at the time would echo that. But it just didn't seem that difficult. It's very often the case, it seems, in life that people under the most extreme circumstances, well, some people anyway, what is brought to the surface is their hidden resources. They respond far more positively than even they themselves would have expected. And I would say that was true of me. I mean, that was my experience. I thought, well, I'm dealing with this rather well. And it just seemed to get better. And that has been a continuous process for me. It's never changed. I'm not saying that I don't lapse into unskillful mental states. Of course I do. But I'm much more on the ball about that. But I don't have quite the same pressure upon me as I had in the first, certainly during the period of my early treatments and diagnosis, which is really quite intense. But you can't live at that level life at that level of intensity for long. It's too much, and inevitably some of it falls away. But you gain things. At least I feel I've gained things from that. I think that it's changed me very, very positively. The whole experience.
What kind of things have you gained?
All these things come out in the book, but I suppose a greater appreciation of beauty. Beauty has always been important to me. Well, certainly from a very early age it has been, and by that I mean my interest in the arts and so forth. But especially natural beauty, and also, I listen to Schubert and Beethoven a lot while I was incapacitated by radiotherapy or chemotherapy, and they were a great source of solace to me. But not just solace; they just swept me away with their music, and I appreciated the music so much more, and it just deepened my appreciation of life. And of course, when at my age, I'm now 74. It's very difficult to hang on to that sort of appreciation. Some people can, and they don't necessarily have to undergo a serious illness in order to do so. But a lot of people lose it. But I've never lost it, and it's partly because of the way that Bhante has presented the Dharma to us in the West, because he had a wonderful aesthetic sensibility himself, and I picked up on that a lot, and I spent a lot of time with him. I knew him extremely well. He wasn't just my teacher, we were good friends, and we often talked about literature and music and so on and so forth, and art.
Some people who are listening to this may not know much about Triratna. So Bhante was Urgyen Sangharakshita, who founded what is now called the Triratna Buddhist order. And Devamitra and myself, we're both order members in this, and Windhorse Publications is part of Triratna, though publishes more widely as well. And people call him Bhante. We call him Bhante as a sort of honorific, I suppose.
Well, it means venerable sir. It's a term of a term of respect offered to a monk, even though he wasn't a monk, not at the time anyway.
One of the things reading your book that is so, it's sort of delicious. It's not just delightful, it's sort of delicious, is it's clear that you were writing about what was happening at the time it was happening. It doesn't feel like a book in which you're recounting previous memories. There's so much dialogue. You have a sort of actor's ear, or possibly even a scriptwriter's ear, for stories, for nuance in the conversation. And I imagine you would have been obviously you were quite poorly during some of the treatments. Energy was very low, and you were quite knocked out particularly when the treatments were just carrying sort of on, and your body was weakening, and yet you continued to write. In what way was that part of your practice, I suppose?
Well, it was a very important part of what helped me through it, because as I said earlier, I wanted to objectify my experience. That helps you to understand it better. And that means you've really got to focus your mind. And believe me, when your mind is in a state of chemo brain, that's not easy, exacerbated by hormone therapy, which has its own impact on the mind. And I can remember sometimes sitting at my desk for a whole morning determined to write something, and I'd come out with a sentence or two, and that would be all I could do. I'd keep drifting away from what I was doing. I had to focus my energy constantly and try to focus on the words, try and work out what it was I was trying to communicate. But I also took it in the spirit of a challenge. It's part of the spirit that I think has governed my life throughout. And I just got on with it. I don't know. I mean, I felt I had to do it. I didn't think that much about it. I just did it. I just wanted to get it done. And I suppose I wanted it to be as true as it possibly could be. Of course, all writing is fiction. I understand that. There's no question. And much of what is in my book is fiction, but at least it's based on fact, and it's based on my actual experience. But of course, we interpret our experience, as we all know. So it's a version of that. It's as close as I can get to presenting you with the truth of what was going on for me. But I think also, and I'm sure this is true because I've spoken to enough people now to understand that it is, that in doing that, much of what I wrote about is not just to do with me, it's universal human experience. I think that's one reason why I have had so much appreciation for the book, because I really have, more than I ever expected. And it keeps on happening, and sometimes in quite surprising ways.
We'll come back to the impact of the book and what it's been like for you, talking to people who have now read it, who haven't, who may have gone through a similar experience. But I'm curious, before we move on, about men and men in cancer treatment. We were talking the other day, and you were saying that your oncologist was wondering about whether or not you'd come and speak to a group of people who have cancer and are undergoing treatment, and saying that it was difficult for her to get, or them to get, men to attend those groups. And it's prostate cancer that you have. In times there are very frank bits in the book about like swollen testicles, which wasn't, of course, part of the cancer, and endless questions about erections and all sorts of things. Did you, when you were thinking about publishing this book, did you also have in mind the fact that, like, in a way, men need to have ways of talking or thinking about this kind of experience? Well,
yes, because I know just how difficult it is for men. With this, in this regard, men, I think, generally have a different approach to life from women in all sorts of ways. And I was talking about this with my oncologist when I saw her last week, because actually what she'd asked me to do was to go over to a place called the Maggie Centre, which is a cafe where they have support services for people with cancer. And, she said to me a little bit sheepishly, she said, I know it's just my gender prejudice, but I forget to send men over there and don't think about it. Partly, I think, because I think they wouldn't go. Would you go over and give us some feedback? So I went over and I gave her some pretty strong feedback. Well, basically, I wasn't surprised that it's just not the sort of thing men want to do. I just know. I mean, it's like I went into the centre and I was very warmly welcomed, given a cup of tea, and someone talked to me straight away, a volunteer, and then a woman came over to me who was a psychologist, and we started talking, and then I spoke to a radiographer. Now, they were all women, and I think that however you account for this, men just find that very difficult. I think I said to my oncologist, I said, look, I think men need other men, and it's got nothing to do with misogyny or anything of that sort. It's just it just seems to be a fact of the male experience. I probably will talk with her more about that, because she was clearly quite intrigued by what I was saying and seemed to sort of understand, actually. And I hope that maybe we can take that further, and there might be something that I can do to help.
Well, it's a sort of public health truism that men are less likely to go and get tested if they're concerned about something, or they're just for a whole range of reasons. No doubt there are barriers to accessing services and things like that.
Yeah, well, my father was classic. I mean, he just didn't want to go anywhere near doctors. Mind you, my mother wasn't much better, but that was because she worked as a nurse later on in life, and after she'd stopped being a scullery maid. I mean, she left school when she was 14. But anyway, she worked in hospitals from her late teens onwards, and as a nurse, and she would always shake her head if I mentioned, well, why don't you go and see a doctor? And said, "Oh no, Michael, I've seen them make too many mistakes." And she's absolutely contemptuous about the comments put down by the young doctor on my father's death certificate. Said he didn't die of that. I know perfectly well what he died of. So in my case, it was both my parents, but my father in particular, he was terrified of going to see a doctor in case there was something wrong. And as a consequence, he had an enlarged heart, which was not treated, and he died younger than he needed to have done. So it's very common, I know. And I feel that in myself, I'm very reluctant to go unnecessarily, what I consider to be unnecessarily, to see a doctor. I don't know how you explain it. Men are more like that. And but I think they need help from other men. I've absolutely got no doubts about that whatsoever, which is why I live in a men's community and have done all my life. I value that. I value living with men. And I know many women who value living just with women. It sort of makes sense. Not a popular view, but it's certainly one which I express unashamedly because I think it's true.
It's also clear that you had symptoms, didn't you? So you were in a situation where you actually had a scare, not a scare, but something where it was like, oh, okay, there is something definitely wrong. But a lot of men, particularly with prostate cancer, have no or low level symptoms, and
Yeah, but it was late on. I mean, it was clear that by that time the cancer was already pretty serious. Blood coming out with a large spurt of blood coming out with your urine is not something which should happen. I knew that straight away. So I didn't hesitate on that occasion to go and seek help, of course. But other minor things, you just don't even think about.
We asked a number of people, some Buddhists, some in the medical field, for endorsements to read your book earlier on. And William Stones, who wrote one of the endorsements, and I thought he pointed to something that was very helpful, which was, he was saying, like, a lot of cancer is discussed in terms of a metaphor of battle or fight. And certainly we know that the sort of idea of death or dying or succumbing, I mean, all of this language that we use, succumbing to illness as if dying was an unnatural event or a failure or something. There's just none of that language in your book. I mean, if there's a battle to be had, you don't use that metaphor, but if you were to use that metaphor, it would be with your mind, wouldn't it?
That's right. Well, that's the only time I used the metaphor, actually. I knew, I think I said it fairly early on, I knew immediately that the battle I was facing ahead of me was not with my body, but with my mind. And that's because, of course, I can't do anything about my body. Of course I can. I can undergo the treatments and try to stay healthy and all that. But ultimately, it's really it's out of my control. But I can control what goes on in my mind. And so, but that's not a battle with cancer. That's a battle with my mental states, which is very different. Facing up to the cancer is just facing up to one of the four sights: sickness and the implication of death and its association with old age. That's just the way it is. And I mean, life is like that, and I feel you've got to face it full on, head on. But no, I didn't use that kind of language. I wasn't thinking like that. Sometimes I would joke about it a little bit and say, either this thing's going to kill me or I'm going to kill it. But it was I dropped that pretty early on because I thought that wasn't the most helpful way to view it, actually. Hence the title, really, Entertaining Cancer, treating it as a guest, an unwelcome one, admittedly, but one which has landed on your doorstep. You can't, it's forced its way into the house. You've got to somehow deal with it in the most positive way. Treat it kindly. It might treat you kindly back. It might shrink away. It hasn't done, actually, but that's just life.
Mm. You spent a lot of time in various treatment rooms with a lot of other people who had cancer. What is your, I suppose, what did you notice about other people that you were spending time with who were also in treatment? I suppose what was helpful and what was less helpful for them?
Well, I think there are a number of things I noticed. Some people seemed very withdrawn. Others seemed to want to talk. I think in the case of some of the people that I observed, remember one woman in particular who was, she hardly ever spoke to anybody. And I was often waiting in the radiotherapy department for treatments. And she was a Sinhalese woman, actually, and she was chanting all the time as if to just sort of keep on the chant, but in a way which didn't seem to me to be really helping her. It's like she was praying and hoping that, for the best result. And that was an extreme example of an attitude which I encountered a number of times. People dwelling upon hope in a way which was unrealistic or unhelpful. I try to avoid hope because I understand that hope in that context it's just being unrealistic. Things may turn out as you wish, but maybe not. It's best just to deal with what's there. But other people, there was a whole range of responses. I remember, and I've given an account of this, one man who got very, very angry for all sorts of reasons on the chemotherapy ward. Just exploding. I can understand. He's about quite a bit older than me. He was about 77 at the time, I think, and it was his second round. His cancer had recurred, and he was a very explosive character by temperament. But he really made life very difficult for everybody else on the ward. And Dianata, who's a young doctor who I live with and who has read my book, said he thought that I'd really captured something which needed to be better known, just how difficult it is for nurses and doctors sometimes dealing with their patients, because he said what you account in the book is very common. I only saw that one instance of it, but it was quite extreme when he exploded. It really was like you didn't want to be in the same room as him. So that's two examples. There's the more positive responses of people who saw it as they could see that it was giving them a new perspective on life, one which was expanding their horizons, one which they were pleased to have, and that they knew would not have arisen for them, at least, had they not got the cancer. There are many, many instances of people saying, when they get a cancer diagnosis, it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. And why? And I think the answer to that question is that they feel more alive. It suddenly wakes you up. Oh my God, this thing could happen this thing could kill me at any time. And a very striking example of this, actually, was the case of Claudio Abbado. I don't know if you know who he is, the very famous Italian conductor. He was for many years. Well, he was the successor, Herbert von Karajan's successor as music director and principal conductor for the Berlin Philharmoniker. And towards, I think he was in his 70s, probably in his 70s, maybe a bit earlier than that, he was diagnosed with a pretty serious cancer. And he resigned his post in Berlin, the first musical director to do so. It was unprecedented, but he said it wasn't the only consideration. Anyway, when he'd recovered from his treatment, which in his case was mostly surgery, there was a young British conductor, actually, who was one of his protégés, was talking about him and said that what was so exciting about working with Claudio was that there was a certain sort of unknown element entered into his conducting after that. And he said you had a sense of somebody who knew that this could happen, this thing could be all over at any moment. There's a certain urgency in what he was doing, which brought out the most refined sort of performances from him or from the orchestras that he was conducting. He's a much loved conductor, by the way. He did eventually die. I think the cancer recurred, but that's a very high-profile example of someone really learning from what life had delivered to them and making something positive out of it, taking things to another level. In his case, that was certainly the impression of this young conductor, whose name I can't remember. He's quite well known himself now, but he said he was really struck by that. So there's a whole range of different responses. And of course, I saw people who were very bitter about the cancer, others who were just resigned and didn't know what to do, confused. Others who were just sort of taking it in the most positive spirit. It was quite a wide range of responses. Yeah, the whole range of what's best and worst in humanity, in a sort of microscopic kind of way, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, without trying to be facile about it at all. Like, actually, we are all dying. We're all awake, but not as awake as we could be. So obviously, this is people who have a cancer diagnosis are not in another world. It's just, there's something that could happen to any of us at any point in time.
Yeah, they're more in this world.
Yes.
They're more in it because the reality of this world is facing you a bit more sort of uncompromisingly.
Yeah. I mean, in very different sort of spheres, I've often thought, like, actually, when there's a kind of intensity in a situation, that's when it's possible to see most clearly and to value things most clearly as well. Yeah. I suppose there's just a very particular moment when your body's at stake in that kind of way, and it's death that you're talking about, and you're up against it.
That's just reminded me of something, actually. It comes back to one of your earlier questions. I think one of the things that people seem to be really appreciating about the book is that I've been very frank about everything, that I've not sort of tried to dodge things. I mean, there was not always an element somewhere lurking in the back of my mind. I had to be careful. I didn't want to dodge anything, actually. But there's, our motives for doing things are never completely pure, and the elements would creep in, and I'd have to sort of work out why, what am I trying to avoid, and this is not good, is it? Don't I need to look a bit more deeply at this issue?
Can you give an example?
Well, I think that when it wasn't conscious at the time, I don't think it was conscious when I was writing particularly, but looking back at it, I think it is, that when my oncologist told me at the end of the radiotherapy that there was a 50% chance that the cancer would recur, I sort of, I didn't want to hear that. I was in it for the cure. But, the cure seemed a little bit more elusive than she was letting on at the beginning. And I spent a good, 24 hours really working through that, working it out and coming to terms with it, coming to grips with it and then coming to terms with it, and then just moving on beyond it. So there's a whole section in my book where I think I mentioned Susie Littler, who was a friend of mine who died of cancer when she was 34. She was a hugely successful actress, playing all leading juvenile leads at the National Theatre by the time I lost sight of her. But she died of cancer when she was 34. All her friends were saying, look, she's not admitting it. We know she's got cancer. I mean, it was a very complicated life she was living at that time. I know things I'm not going to say here, but she came to mind because I thought, well, there's an element of that at work here with you. You've got to let it go. So anything like any kind of resistance to facing the truth, the reality, I try to sort of push away because it doesn't help you. Which I didn't think it was going to help me anyway. And now my cancer has metastasized. I'm definitely on the way out. My death warrant has definitely been issued. It may be a few years. Who knows? There's no sort of all doctors can do is deal in averages. I mean, on average, 7 or 8 more years for me if things go well. It could be more than that. It could be less. It could end very quickly. Who knows? But when you reach the final lap, as it were, it's not that bad when you've had 5 years leading up to it, which I have had. I've had plenty of warning. I've been living with cancer for 5 years. Why should I be surprised about this? And actually, when I was told, it didn't surprise me at all. I was kind of half expecting it. Even though it was not what I would have chosen, but so be it. And then you start to think about other possibilities. Well, what's the positive side of death? You get a new body. That's great. This one's definitely this body is definitely past its use-by date. I could do with a new body. Why not? The great adventure, as some people describe death, is before me. It's getting closer. It opens up all sorts of potentially exciting possibilities.
It strikes me that you're not afraid of yourself.
I don't know. What do you mean by that?
Well, I suppose in Subhuti's endorsement of your book, he says something about like you've passed the test of cancer. I'm paraphrasing here, but cancer is a test. You get to know what you can and can't bear and what your limits are and what you're able to move towards, hopefully not all at one go. As you say, you've been living with this for 5 years, but it sounds to me, just in the way you're talking about your own death, that you're not afraid of encountering something in your experience that you can't over time process or accept.
Well, I would hope that's true, whether or not it actually is. But and again, I think it goes right back to my origins and my certainly my theatre ambitions. I really, really wanted to succeed. I didn't just want to be good at my work, and I was good at my work. I got enough feedback to make that absolutely clear. I wanted to make the top. And I would have done anything to make sure I could, except it was making me so damned unhappy. I had to give it up. But then that was a part of my learning process as well. I had to let that in. I really don't want to do this anymore. I didn't really understand why, but I kind of faced it, and it could have worked out very badly. I mean, I remember leaning over the parapet of Hungerford Bridge across the Thames between Embankment and the South Bank, and after seeing a particularly grim film and being tempted to throw myself over because I was so utterly appalled at what I'd just seen. And it was the culmination of reading all the wrong books. Been reading some really depressing French authors, novelists. Blasé Sandra probably was the worst. Sartre didn't help either. And all these films from South America dealing with the political situation there. And it was just too much. It was like a big, big dose of samsara all at once. And I didn't know what the answers to it were. And I could have just ended it there. I knew that I wouldn't actually. Somehow there was something in me which wouldn't let that happen. But I could imagine without finding the Dharma, that something of that sort might have happened in the end.
I am very glad that was not your fate and destiny.
So am I, as it happens.
I mean, I was thinking you write a book and it has to have a good old narrative shape, doesn't it? There's the sort of dramatic moment and then there's the ups and downs of the treatments. And then, the book leaves at a point where the possibility of cure is there, the possibility that maybe one day the cancer will come back is there, but, and now you're in a different phase. You do know that the cancer is back. You've got new sets of decisions to make about treatment, and you're in it again.
That's right.
So we're going to hopefully we'll also just keep in touch along the way and continue to support the work that the book is doing to, I don't know, give some inspiration and some ways of doing things and some humour to all those who are in that world. Yeah. Is there anything that you'd like to leave us with, Devamitra, on this occasion?
Gratitude, I suppose. Gratitude that Windhorse published the book. Gratitude that Subhuti pushed me to putting it forward to you. And everybody who's supported me throughout, a wonderful period of my life, but very not, well, how would you put it? Not an easy one at the same time. A strange combination of things, really. And gratitude to Bhante. I mean, Sangharashta, the founder of Triratna, because I don't think I could have done this without him. I learned so much from him as a friend and as a teacher. I still do from his writings. And I think I've been very blessed in life. And this is, the latest blessing I've received. The book is out. People are reading it. I'm sure there must be some people out there who are not enjoying it or don't like it or whatever, but they're not going to tell me. But I'm getting so much appreciation, and that makes such a difference. It makes you feel, well, it was all worthwhile. The whole process was worthwhile. A way of giving in a way which wouldn't have been open to me had I not had the cancer. So, I think my final feeling on the whole thing is one of gratitude, and that will continue, I'm sure.
Well, thank you, Devamitra, for writing this book. We'll put some links down below so that people can find out where they can get hold of the book and where they can go and see you at a Zoom or in-person launch or other talk about the book. And we're wishing you all the best. We'll keep in touch.
Yes.
And thank you for coming here this afternoon.
And thank you very much for inviting me to do this.
Windhorse Publications is part of the Triratna Buddhist community, and this podcast is sponsored by Future Dharma Fund, a Buddhist fundraising charity which helps fund Dharma projects across the world, including ours. If you're enjoying the podcast, please consider donating to them to help them fund current and future projects like ours. You can find out more about Windhorse Publications by going to our website.